Adventurers Guild. Oh no. Nabe was a powerful adventurer, but Henry had only noticed after she had vanished. In addition, she was the partner of the man who had subdued the wise king of the forest. She might have been able to tell Henry about what was going on in the forest. The giant of the east and the serpent of the west, and whatever that monument of destruction is, if only I had asked her about all of those. I'm such a dummy, why didn't I think of that earlier? Henry drove her wagon through a gate, while scolding herself for her carelessness. Diamond Suit Erantle could be roughly divided into 3 zones, separated by the walls of the city. The middle zone was where people lived. It was also where the Adventurers Guild could be found. Ideally, it would have been safest to sell the herbs at the Herbalists Guild. However, that would have involved a lot of troublesome paperwork, so she had chosen to go to the Adventurers Guild instead to use them as a go-between. She had considered drawing on Lizzie's help for this, but Henry had decided that using her best friend's grandmother's name would be too shameless, and reconsidered. After taking Henry's wishes into consideration, Nymphyria had suggested going to the Adventurers Guild. If Nymphyria had come in person, they would not have needed to use the guild, and he have sold everything directly. However, Henry was not confident about dealing with the sharks in the Herbalists Guild, so she had decided not to begrudge the service charge and use the Adventurers Guild as a go-between. Henry headed down the road Nymphyria and Brita had told her about. Although she had been traveling with the goblins on the way to the city, they were currently waiting outside the city for Henry to finish her business. She realized that this was the first time she was alone ever since she had set out from the village, and her hands gripped the reins even more tightly. The tension stiffened Henry's shoulders. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, she looked around in all directions and her destination was in front of her. I did it! Henry squeaked in joy. Now that she had gotten all the way here, she probably would not get lost. She handed the reins of her wagon to the sentry standing at the door of the Adventurers Guild and pushed open the door. Inside, warriors in full plate armor, hunters with bows on their backs, and magic casters both arcane and divine were walking around. Some were enthusiastically swapping information about the monsters nearby, others were looking closely at the parchments on the nearby notice board, and a few were getting a feel for their newly purchased gear. The place was filled with a heat and activity that made Henry unsteady on her feet, a world of unrelenting scrutiny and tension. This was the world of adventurers. Henry's mouth dropped open as she beheld a sight she would never see in her village, then hurriedly shut it back up. It was true that she hailed from the boondocks, and it was hardly shameful for her to be startled by the mood of the big city. Still, a girl of her age staring dumbly with her mouth open was just embarrassing. Henry set out, her back ramrod straight, consciously checking her movements, so that she did not move the arms and legs on the same side of her or do anything which would invite laughter. However, Henry started to have her doubts about whether it was all right for an obviously out-of-place village girl to be strolling so boldly among these muscular adventurers. At the counter, she was welcomed by the receptionist's smile. Welcome. Why yes, I've been welcomed. Henry locked eyes with the receptionist. Following which, the two of them smiled bitterly. Henry felt her shoulders relax, for what might have been the first time since she came to Erantle. Then, may I ask what business you have with the Adventurers Guild? First, I'd like to ask for some help with the sale of herbs. Understood. Where are the herbs now? Henry told her they were on the wagon outside, and the receptionist turned to speak to a woman beside her. The appraiser is going to check it now, please wait within the guild until he's done. Understood. Then, another thing, although we won't be putting out a request right away, we might do so in the future. Henry explained the situation to the smiling receptionist. The other woman's smile became stiff as she heard Henry's story. Is that so? I'm just a receptionist, and I don't decide the difficulty of requests, but if it involves the wise king of the forest, it might be a task that only the adamantite-ranked Momon-san can handle. In that case, the fees would be very expensive. There seemed to have been a shift in the receptionist's mood. She seemed entirely unmotivated, as though she had decided it was pointless even after sitting through all that. What a pain. While living with the goblins, Henry had become adept at reading the emotions of others. Goblins were ugly and looked very different from humans, but she had worked hard to recognize and deduce the changes in their feelings. In this way, Henry had grown. She must be thinking the village doesn't have that much money. How well, given my clothes, it's a reasonable conclusion to make, and she is pretty well dressed, after all. Henry briefly compared her clothes to those of the receptionist, and concluded that fashion-wise, she was completely outclassed. But clothes like those are wasted on working in the village, and they're far too cumbersome to work in besides. Thus, according to Henry the woman, this battle was a draw. Ah, I heard the city would provide a subsidy. That's correct. However, the subsidy is only a portion of the fee, and you'll have to pay the rest yourself. Adamantite-ranked adventurers are very expensive, and even after the subsidy they'll still cost a lot of money to hire. Of course, you could offer less money for a request, but the Adventurers Guild might not allow it. If you offer less money than the stipulated amount, your request will be a low priority, so there may be no takers. Please take that into consideration. She must have memorized the regulations, given the way she had fluently rattled all that off with her eyes glazed over. It would seem the receptionist was treating Henry like a customer who was not buying anything. That's only natural. A customer who doesn't spend money isn't a customer at all. Everything the receptionist had said was turning out like how Firia predicted, so she did not feel too upset. It was a reality that nobody would help the weak. That's why Ainsul Gaunsama is our savior. He even gave a simple village girl like me a valuable treasure like that. She wondered how the receptionist would react if she used this horn as payment. It would be great to see the look on her face, but Henry knew she could not do such a thing. This item had been given to her by that great magic caster, with the instruction to use it to protect yourself. She could not sell it off, not even for the village's sake. She could not be that ungrateful. And so, Henry nodded. I understand. Then, please tell me how much the fees will be. That way I can go back to the village to discuss things. I see. Then how about this? Please come back after the inspection for the herb sales are done. W should have finished calculating the request fees by then. After thanking the receptionist, Henry left the counter, and sat on a sofa in the lounge, staring at the ceiling to while away the time, while the inspection dragged on. So tired. Every moment since she'd entered the city gates had been a grand adventure. Or rather, when she thought about it, ever since the day her parents had died, every day had set her eyes spinning. All I wanted was to lead a simple, unchanging life in the village. As she thought about the things she had lost, Henry sighed. She thought about what had happened after that, the goblins, her childhood friend, and then she shook her head. Can't they go any faster? If she had something to do, she would not have the free time to think about such depressing things. She would rather empty her mind and focus on work than think about things that made her sad. Emat-san, the appraisal is complete. Henry rose and headed for the sound of the merchant's voice. Thank you very much. The fee is, at this moment, Henry heard the sound of someone striding, practically sprinting over to her. As she turned, she saw the receptionist from earlier in front of her. Henry-san of Karn Village. No, I mean, Henry-sama. Could I have a bit to discuss the matter from just now with you? This was the same receptionist from just now, but her attitude was completely different. Even her eyes were bloodshot. I'm sorry, but I was just about to tell her about the results of the appraisal. You shut up, I'm talking here. The receptionist's reply made the merchant's face twitch. If it's all right with you, would you like to discuss this over a drink in the receiving room? She was smiling, but the smile did not reach her eyes. There was a strange, desperate look in them. Perhaps she had sensed something from the confused Henry. The receptionist's eyes were moist, and her hands were clasped together as though in prayer. Please, I'm begging you, you have to let me hear you out. If not, I'll be done for. After hearing that desperate, almost pathetic plea, Henry had no idea what was going on, but not to giving her a chance would be too cruel. She glanced back to the merchant, who seemed to pick up on her intentions, because he nodded slightly to her. Got it. Then, could you show me the way? In that moment, the receptionist's body visibly relaxed. Thank you very much. Really, thank you very much. Come, let me show you the way. Henry followed after her, bathed in the curious stares of everyone around. The receptionist was tightly gripping her right hand, as though she did not want Henry to escape. Was I too rash? She entered the waiting room, traces of unease in her heart. Henry silently looked around the inside of the room. There was nobody in there besides herself, and it was intricately decorated, to the point where she had doubts about even sitting on the sofa. Come, please have a seat. The moment she sat down, a voice from the corner of her mind wondered if she would be imprisoned or meet some other, similar fate. However, nothing happened when she sat on the sofa. All she felt was the comfortable furniture taking her body weight. Would you like something to drink? We have some excellent liquor. How about food? Too early? Yes, kind of. How about fruits? No, sweets and desserts, maybe. There's no need to go to that extent. The dramatic change in the receptionist's attitude was starting to scare Henry. In the first place, she had not considered the receptionist's treatment of her to have been particularly cold. It had been a reasonable reaction, and not really negative. At the very least, it seemed much more normal than she did now. But why had this leopard changed its spots? Was it because of the horn again? No, what are you saying? Anything is possible for you. We can provide liquor, brandy, and the snacks to go with them too. No, there's really no need, and besides, I'm running out of time. Can we start discussing the matter? Certainly. You're absolutely right. Then please, by all means, do continue. The receptionist whipped out a sheet of thin, white paper. All the paper she had seen before had been much thicker, and had other colors mixed in. This must be some high-class stuff here. Was it really all right to use it? Henry began speaking. She had only given a brief outline just now, so she had to patiently explain the details this time round. Eventually, just as Henry's throat was starting to dry out, the conversation finally came to an end. Thank you for your help. There's some drinks here, please help yourself before you leave. It's fine to leave the cups here, but thank you for coming to us today. The receptionist suddenly stood up, and left the room as though she had been chased from it. Really, what happened? Of course, there was nobody here to answer her muttered question. Diamond suit. In the end, Henry did not spend the night in Irantal, but headed back to Karn village. She would be sleeping on the plains, but she did not feel uneasy. On the contrary, she had a very good night's sleep. That was because unlike her journey to the city, she had a group of passengers riding with her this time round. I see it at last. Before her stood the wall of Karn village. Although the neatly arranged logs looked impressive in their own right, Henry could not help but think they looked shabby compared to Irantal's fortifications. That's right. I need to report all this to the chief quickly. Henry was replying to one of the goblins in the bed of the wagon. 5 goblins had escorted Henry to Irantal, including the goblin proest, Kona, and there was a goblin rider, Chasuk, maintaining a vigil some distance away from her wagon. Well, half the problems have been dealt with, but apparently the chief's request of you didn't go too well, did it, Ain-san? Yes, about that, according to the priest-san, almost nobody wants to move to the village. That's strange. I mean, there's already other immigrants from other villages here. Why aren't there more people? Was the priest lying? No, a priest would never lie, Henry smiled bitterly. To be honest, frontier villages are pretty dangerous, so they're keeping their distance. We were hoping for a bunch of third sons who'd come here for the promise of land, but not many people will come here if they aren't ordered to. And the people who moved here in the beginning had lived in frontier villages like us. Their situations are different. Is that so? That's how it is. But actually, that kind of relieves me. It would probably be very difficult for normal people to form a good relationship with goblins and live with them in the same village. Any immigrants from the city would probably blanch at the sight and do their best to stay away. And frankly speaking, if Henry were forced to choose between the city dwellers and the goblins, she would choose the goblins without hesitation. At this moment, the wagon shook, and the sound of something metallic hitting the wagon bed rang out from behind her. "Ah, sorry. Are you all right?" Henry turned her head to look behind. Although the goblins were seated on the floor of the wagon, there were some sacks there, one of which made the metallic noise when the wagon shook. "Ah, we're fine, Ain-san. No need to worry. Speaking of which, with this many arrows, we'll be able to hunt to our heart's content." The goblins looked so happy when they looked at the bag that Henry forgot to reply to them, simply smiling instead. They crossed the wheat fields and entered a half-opened gate. After greeting everyone, Henry drove the wagon to their original meeting point, in order to unload the cargo. As she stopped the wagon at the meeting point, the goblins within, having heard the wagon, streamed out to greet her. "Oh. Welcome back, Ain-san. I'm glad nothing happened." Henry smiled. Their welcome was what made Henry feel that she had really returned to the village, because to her, the goblins were part of her family. "I'm home. That's a lot of stuff. Are you bringing it inside?" "That's right, bro. Do me a favor and lend me a hand." "Coming." The goblins moved as one, deftly unloading the cargo. No matter how Henry directed them, they tucked everything without making a mistake until everything was squared away. This was the proof of how much the goblins had integrated themselves into village life. "Ah, Ain-san, let us handle the rest. Why don't you go meet your sister and Anisan? Although I don't know if Anisan's still helping with Aga's people." "Thank you, but I still need to report to the chief first." "Really? Got it. Then, just to be safe, I'll come with you. After all, there's still the matter of the ogres." Goku spoke to some of his comrades after leaving the meeting place, and then he hopped up onto the wagon beside Henry, who was driving. The other goblins who had been guarding Henry on the road to Irantal looked at him with jealousy in their eyes, but none of them actually voiced any opposition. It was probably because they agreed he was doing the right thing. "Then, Ain-san, let's go." Henry smiled faintly and said, "I'm counting on you guys. And thank you very much." After thanking the goblins, she spurred her horse into motion. "So what happened in the village since I left?" "Nothing special. The big thing was that we built a place where the ogres could stay inside the village. Of course, the stone golems did most of the work, and it was pretty crudely made out of wood, but in the end, it ended up being a pretty nice place. However, we can't do anything about their smell. Even the towels we give them end up stinking." "I see. Still, that was really fast. Like I said, the stone golems did most of the work. If you want to thank someone, thank the magic caster who gave them to us. And Lupus Regina-san, right? Let's not talk about that Lupus Regina person for now. I don't want to thank her or anything. Something about her just pisses me off." Henry found it hard to believe her ears. This was the first time Goku had ever spoken ill of someone. "How should I put it, she's very scary, like a monster watching us. I don't think Ain-san sensed it yet, but she's the maid of the one who saved our village, Ainsul Gown, so she can't be that bad." "Ah, what a pain!" Henry and Goku's shoulders twitched. That was the voice of the woman they had just been discussing. Henry looked back frantically, and just like the day before, the maid was sitting on the wagon bed like she belonged there. "Really, you're such a pain, En-chan." "Ah, what do you mean?" Maybe before that, you should tell us how you appear out of nowhere." It's simple, Sue. I fell out of the sky, Sue. That's not going to fly. There's quite a few times you've come from above now, but we couldn't sense you. I can make myself invisible, Sue. I'm trying to be subtle, Sue. See how nice I am. Goku turned his face to the front once more. There was irritation written all over it. But, ah yes. It's kind of rare that we get to see you 2 days in a row, Lupus Regina-san. Did something happen? Lupus Regina glared at Henry. Henry could not help but think, a beautiful person is pretty even when she makes a face like that. Well, kind of. But anyway, I was just wondering what was going on, Sue. Speaking of which, what happened to that miniature gobo of yours? He's fine. I think he should be in the chief's house. Why the chief's house? Because we rescued a few more goblins from his tribe? They're staying there while we build a place for the goblins to stay in the village. Yeah, it kind of makes sense. Aga's the son of his tribe's chief. He must feel like he has a duty to protect them or something. Really, he's just a kid, but he's so mature. Although Lupus Regina was just smiling lightly, anyone who saw her looks would be captivated by the charm radiating from her. Even Henry found herself looking at her in admiration, despite the fact that they were both women. Oops, shouldn't you be watching your front instead? That's right. Henry hastily looked to her front once more, the tips of her ears bright red. After stopping in front of the chief's house, Henry and Goku got off the wagon. Then, I'll bring the horse back to the stables, Sue. Don't feel like disturbing you guys. Let me know what you guys talked about afterwards, I understand. Then, I'm sorry for imposing, but I'll leave this you. Henry bowed to Lupus Regina, who replied with a hoi hoi and a smile before driving the wagon off. Henry knocked on the door, announced herself loudly enough for everyone inside to hear, and opened the door. The chief and Egu were facing each other across a table. Oh, welcome back. Please, have a seat. How were things in the city? As the chief spoke, Henry sat herself beside Egu. For a moment Egu's body seemed to go stiff, but she must have just been imagining things. Then, that's it for me. In that case, Chief, please take care of us. Henry had no idea who those words were meant for. Since the only others present were Henry, Goku and the chief, it seemed obvious that they had been intended for the village chief. However, Egu had been looking at her, with a stiff back and pursed lips. Henry looked into Egu's eyes, and in his steadfast, unblinking gaze, she realized that he was not kidding or playing a trick. Why did it have to be her? Amidst Henry's confusion, Egu excused himself and left the chief's home. Hey. Wait then, Henry, can you tell me about it? No, yes. I get it. It weighed heavily on her mind, but she could clear up her doubts later. The report was more important for now. After deciding that, Henry clearly and concisely related the events that had occurred in the city. The most important part was that nobody wanted to move to Karn village. However, the chief seemed to have anticipated this, because there was no regret on his face, only calm acceptance. So that's how it is. Well, it can't be helped. We're a frontier village and monsters appear frequently around these parts, so it makes sense that hardly anyone would want to come here. The village chief said what Henry had been thinking. It might have well been what everyone in the village had already accepted. You've done a lot for us. Thank you. The chief lowered his head, and Henry said, it's all right, in return. It had been confusing at times, but it had also been a good experience. Then the chief's line of sight flickered to Goku for a second. There is one thing I would like to entrust to you, Henry Amat. Yes. What is it? You're being so serious, Chief. I hope you will carry on in my position as village chief. The sheer variety of expressions that flashed across Henry's face was like a piece of performance art. Yeah? What is this? Hey. Don't tell me Egu was saying those, eh? You getting flustered won't help. Don't interrupt me when I'm flustered. Chief, are you retarded? Why are you saying this? Maybe retarded is a bit much. I understand you're excited and nervous about this. I know that much, but I'm hoping you can calm down and listen to me. Calm down? How can I calm down? I'm just a simple village girl. Why do I have to deal with this village chief crap? Get a hold of yourself. The voice was full of power, but to Henry it was just a little loud. Even so, it helped her regain a bit of her composure. No, if she didn't listen to the chief, she'd never make sense of things, or at least that was what part of her was thinking. I understand that you're very confused. However, I hope you can sit down and consider things with a calmly. For starters, who is the heart of the village? Isn't that you, Chief San? That would be incorrect. I feel that you are the heart of the village. The goblins and the newly arrived ogres all acknowledge you as their leader, right? That's correct. Everything we do revolves around Ain-san. Then, there's the goblins you helped. From what Aegis told me, they also see you as the boss. Henry's mouth turned into the shape of a lambda. It might be true that the goblins were that way, but what would the villagers think? They would never accept this. I can guess at what you're thinking. The villagers will object, is that it? I've already spoken with everyone and gotten their approval. Last night, we had a meeting of the villagers and got their opinions. And it was unanimous, they all wanted you to be the new chief. What? Why? That attack was a huge shock for all of us, Henry. Everybody is hoping for a strong leader. How am I strong? I'm just a simple village girl. Although there was some muscle on her arms, she was still a village girl who could barely use a weapon. If they wanted strength, surely they should have picked from among the members of the security force, no? Strength is not measured by one's courage alone. Don't you think being able to order the goblins around is a form of strength too? The barriers both think you're suitable as village chief too. Envy. Henry sounded like a chicken being strangled to death. That, and I'm getting on in years. I need to find a successor soon. What do you mean, getting on in years? You aren't anywhere near old, Chief. Is that why you've been talking like an old man? The chief was around his mid-40s, so it was still a bit early to be calling him old. After all, he was still at an age where he could work. Leaving aside the matter of talking like an old man, you should have noticed by now, but the forest around the village is undergoing a number of changes. Since the wise king of the forest is gone, there's a higher chance of monsters coming out of the forest to attack. All I can do is use my experiences of when the village was safe to lead us, but that won't do. Chief, this may be rude, but I need to ask. You're just trying to run away from this, aren't you? Let me be frank. I cannot say that you're wrong. What Henry saw was the eyes of a man who was honestly speaking his mind. I still remember that day even now. That horrible day when my friends in the village were killed. I knew the Amats well. If we hadn't lived idly, if we had built a wall, if we had been on guard, maybe we wouldn't have suffered so much, maybe we could have held out until Gansama came to help us. That would be tough, Henry thought. This village also had a lot of immigrants who were survivors from the other destroyed villages. Their villages had sturdy walls, though not as strong as Karn villages were now, but they had still been attacked and slaughtered. But those walls could have delayed the attackers by just a little bit, and allowed more people to be saved. Henry agreed on that part. The old way of thinking I had isn't going to work anymore. We need to reorganize and protect the village's safety with our own hands. The only ones who can do this are the flexible and the young. Those people need strength as well. The chief had said his piece. He looked calmly at Henry. Henry listened to the chief's words and seriously considered them. At first, she wanted to refuse because the burden was too heavy. If they were attacked just like that time, she was not sure that she could bear responsibility for the lives of her fellow villagers. However, like she had told the chief just now, was that not just running away from the problem? I don't know if I can handle this big responsibility. That's a natural reaction. I can help with the administration of the village, and the goblins will support you on the security issues. Even so, making the final decision is still scary. What about a council formed from the villagers? To be frank, I'd thought of that myself. However, the bigger the problem, the more likely something will come up that will split up the group and leave them paralyzed by indecision. In the end, without one person calling the shots, we won't be able to solve problems effectively.